Good afternoon, everyone. This is Barbara Threecrow. I'm live with Unraveling the Mystery. It's July 12th, and I'm talking to you from Turtle Island here. I guess you'd say I'm about 100 miles north of the tip of Turtle Island, which is, we call Manhattan. I'm along the great river, the Mahicanituck, the Hudson River, the river that flows both ways. And I've been reading to you Anastasia, the book of the ringing cedars. I'm in the second book, and I'm on chapter 12. And if you've been following along with me, this is kind of a very interesting and mysterious experience this fella Vladimir had in Russia. And he went into the taiga, this great forest there, and met this mysterious young woman who he's still not sure yet, even at the second book, whether she's a witch, a good fairy, or a seer, or whatever. But she talks about things like the ray, R-A-Y, like an energy ray, a frequency. She works with telepathic gifts that she has. Her grandfather and great-grandfather brought her up, taught her these types of things. She speaks to the animals. She's very, I guess you'd say, well, we might say that in our way of, the First Nations people, that she was be a medicine woman or a shaman, although in the First Nations people, the word shaman was not our, based here. It's more in the other cultures, First Nations people, in the other cultures, other part of the world. But I'm just giving you an idea of some of the mysterious things about this young woman. And this man, Vladimir, just now, he had left the taiga, and he's on an airplane. And the title of this chapter is Who Sets the Course? So, he says, seated on the airplane, I closed my eyes. The plane's course was set with precision. It was headed for Moscow. The course of the rest of my life was still to be set, but I was thinking more about entrepreneurs. Many people today still tend to regard entrepreneurs as people who are constantly working out business deals, having amassed their initial capital by some illegal means and multiplying it at the expense of those around them. Naturally, just as in any other segment of our society, there are entrepreneurs and then there are entrepreneurs. However, having been right at the center of entrepreneurial life in our country from the very beginning of perestroika, I can tell you that the majority of the first wave of post-communist entrepreneurs made their initial capital by looking for unorthodox solutions for producing new merchandise or goods which had been in short supply, and finding more efficient ways of structuring manufacturing operations. It was a peculiar characteristic of Soviet and Russian entrepreneurs to make money from scratch, meaning starting with nothing, not even credit. After all, the first wave of entrepreneurs had no access to privatized factories that the next wave enjoyed. They had to fly by the seat of their pants and hope that they would be lucky. And they did make money from scratch. By way of proof, let me cite an example from my own experience. And this is chapter 13, Money from Scratch. Back before perestroika, I was in charge of a small unit in a photographic collective. It included lab technicians and a number of roving photographers. Everyone had both a salary and additional perks, which allowed us to make a fairly decent living for the time. Each member of our unit received a percentage of the total profits. Naturally, we wanted more. But for that, we had to find more clients. I managed to hit upon a solution. Anyone who wishes is free to copy it even today. One day, while I was traveling on a highway in my humpbacked Zephyrets, I got a tire puncture. While getting the tire repaired, I watched the cars passing by one after another and thought to myself, if only we could give all these drivers a chance to have their photo taken, there would be huge profits to be made. It took but a few minutes to formulate a plan of action in my head, a plan whose realization in practice would soon quadruple our unit's profits. It worked this way. One of our photographers would stand at the side of the highway with a camera. He had two assistants with green armbands bearing the SB insignia and brandishing batons like those used by traffic police. Motorists would stop, thinking it was the green or some other patrol, and upon learning that it was simply a photo service being offered and that nobody was about to pounce on them or fine them or inspect their vehicles, drivers were happy to stand in front of their car next to the license plate and have their picture taken. They gave the address where they would like the photos to be sent COD. The license plate had to be showing just in case there was a mix-up in the address. We ended up offering this service on all the major highways leading to Novosibirsk over a 6-month period. Then more and more we started encountering motorists who had already used the service, but during those 6 months, our unit managed to realize a fairly decent income. Later, I thought of starting a photo campaign to take pictures of residential houses, adding postcard phrases like, I live here, home sweet home, and so forth. People from our unit took pictures of thousands of houses, and the demand turned out to be enormous. It got so that the photographers didn't bother asking which residents wanted it. They would simply walk along and take pictures of every house on the street. And a few days later, the Postal Service would deliver the photos to each dwelling and collect payment. People would send these snapshots to their children. Many said the pictures inspired the kids to come home for a visit. Before long, the collective started having problems paying the members of our unit their salaries, which, in the opinion of the management of the day, had exceeded all reasonable bounds. But there was little they could do about it, since everyone in the collective was entitled to an equal share of their unit's profits. During the early days of perestroika, our unit detached itself from the collective and formed an independent cooperative. I was chosen its first chairman. This way we enjoyed greater freedom of movement. We had the opportunity to gather some seed money together, and we expanded the scope of our operations. I began to think about new ventures to increase company profits. One day, I happened to have a conversation with an acquaintance of mine who worked at the Institute of Theoretical and Applied Mechanics. He was complaining that wages were being delayed or not paid at all, and that the lab unit was being threatened with dissolution. Where could they go? What could they do? They weren't needed by anyone, it seemed. Now, what did your lab do before? I asked him. We made thermal gauge tape. Nobody needs it anymore. Well, what was it used for? All sorts of things, he replied. He took a piece of black tape out of his pocket and handed it to me. See for yourself, he said. I took the piece in my hand, and all at once it turned green as I fingered it. I even threw it on the ground. What kind of junk is that? It turns green. Now I've got to wash my hands, I told him, to which he replied, Don't worry, it simply changed color from the warmth of your hand. It's supposed to react to changes in temperature. If the temperature of your hands had been above normal, it would have turned red. The green color indicates a normal temperature. The concept took off quickly. Our company began producing flat thermometers and stress indicators. A piece of tape was stuck onto a sheet of cardboard with bright colored squares. each with a number beside it, indicating degrees of temperature, and presto, a new product was born. We had it distributed through the State Warehousing Agency to many regions of the old Soviet Union. This was before the collapse of the USSR in 1991. Our production staff increased and everyone made a fairly decent living. Our seed capital was growing. The lab also came out of the red since a share of the profits accrued to the Institute. Our cooperative acquired new equipment along with 2 vehicles. And then something happened which gave us an incredible boost. One afternoon, I arrived at the company office and I noticed both our telephones in use. My secretary was on one of them, listening and taking down notes. The other telephone was being manned by the cleaning lady. No sooner had one of the phones been hung up than it started ringing again. At one point, my secretary managed to tell me, "They've been ringing off the hook for over 2 hours already, one call after another nonstop. Everybody's asking for our thermometers and our stress indicators." One fella cursed us, calling us pre-perestroika dimwits. If we were willing to raise our prices, he said, he would buy them from us wholesale at the higher price. They're all placing bulk orders. They're even ready to give us advance deposits. During the early days of perestroika in our country, if you remember, there was quite a proliferation of manufactured kitsch on the market. Plastic clip-on earrings and calendars featuring semi-nude girls. Everyone snapped these things up like crazy. Against that background, what we produced looked like a super novelty. But after 6 months of production, sales suddenly took off with a bang. Something had happened. But what was it? It turned out that on a TV broadcast the previous night, Foreign Affairs correspondent Vladimir Tzevtov was commenting on how innovative the Japanese were and showed a Japanese stress indicator as an example. It looked just like ours. It was then that I realized for the first time the power of advertising and the nature of the beast called luck. Our staff began working 3 shifts a day around the clock. We hired workers to do the packing, trimming, and finishing in their own homes. Profits steadily increased. We acquired a small passenger ship. I also decided to manufacture seeding equipment for independent farmers. I even chartered a large cruise ship to organize business tours and trade expeditions to the regions of the Russian far north. And now, Chapter 14, called A Destructive Force. As head of my very own cooperative, I got to know firsthand what a destructive force, one capable of crushing any material state of well-being, impatience toward each other, and the breakdown of mutual understanding can be. Later, I learnt that this is the very reason behind the failure of many collectives, and it can all start over just a trifle. Indeed, that's how it happened with my first cooperative. Not only was it torn apart itself, but several families were destroyed in the process. Even today, I still don't know how to counteract this force, which erupts spontaneously and is not subject to any common sense. It all began when I decided to procure for our firm a country house with its own estate. I entrusted the details of our acting inventory and supply manager, Alexei Mishunin. He drew up all the necessary sale purchase documents while I went to take a look at the property. It included a large house, a fifth of a hectare of land, a bathhouse, garage, and even a greenhouse. We even got a cow and a flock of sheep in the bargain. Not exactly a priority, but Mishunin said the owners had to go away and they wanted to sell everything all at once. There was feed for the cow, and he had already arranged for a woman from the village to come in and do the milking. A couple of days later, I called a meeting of the members of the cooperative to tell them about our acquisition. I explained it was intended for entertaining guests, as well as being a place where the members of the cooperative could relax and that they could celebrate special occasions there. We would all have to work together to fix up the place, to do renovations, and to modernize the kitchen. The male half of the cooperative greeted the idea with great enthusiasm. But the women began whispering among themselves. It wasn't clear who the ringleader was, but my wife took on the role of spokesperson, saying the men had overstepped all recognized bounds of decency in respect to the women. "We work with you as equals here," she declared. "After that, we go home every day and we clean house, we cook meals, and we take care of the children. Does that seem trifling to you? And now you want us, in addition to all that, to work our asses off at this country house of yours to do renovations and then be cooks and waitresses for your receptions and your drinking parties?" That was when all hell broke loose. The women poured out on the men all their personal and family grievances and overall pet peeves. I realized this when one of them cried out, "All you do is fool around with the dominoes and stare at the tube the whole evening long." I knew that none of the men at the cooperative played dominoes. It was her husband, a firefighter, who played. He didn't even work for us. But wives of the cooperative workers were especially pissed off, and one of them stupidly blurted out to her husband in front of everyone, "You always smell of sweat and cheap cigarettes." He was especially fond of the Prima brand. "And now you're going to be smelling of cow dung, too?" A silence hung over the room. The husband took a deep gulp of air, blushed, and retorted, "I shall especially smell of cow dung, especially so that you won't come near me, you slut." At this, she burst into tears, and the women gathered around to console her, and it made them even more pissed off. They started hurling all sorts of insults. One of our workers was named Zhanya Kolpakov, and he'd invented all sorts of devices to increase productivity. He could fix anything that needed fixing, but now they told him, "We have inventors here, but it takes a whole year to clean up after them." Then the discussion turned to politics. Gorbachev goes on television, but it's Raisa Maximovna who makes all the decisions. I declared a recess. I thought everyone somehow might come to their senses. After the break, they all took their seats again, the outward restraint barely masking the inner tension. Once again, my wife spoke in the name of the women, and with a contrived tranquility, she threw out a venomous ultimatum. She said, "Of course, if you really want a country residence, go ahead. But not one of us women will step foot in it. In other words, it'll be yours alone. And since we share our funds in common and you have no right to spend them without our consent, as compensation, we demand you give us one of the company cars with a driver, specially for our household use. We'll take turns using it." "Great," came a chorus of male voices. "Go ahead and choke yourselves. You'll give you anything you like as long as you promise not to show up here." "They're bound to find some farm hussies out there," one of the women observed. "Well, let them look," retorted another. "Those hussies'll soon make themselves scarce. Who needs them?" None of the men whose wives worked at the cooperative went home that night. It was Friday, and we headed out to our hacienda. We took a good look around and started making plans for settling in. The next day we heated up the bathhouse, and at Miss Shuyan's request, the village women came to milk the cow. We watched how she did it. It was a pleasant time. The cow was quiet, not restless, and she was ours now. The woman advised that she wouldn't always be able to come to do the milking. We'd need to look up somebody else. After an early evening cleansing at the bathhouse, we cooked ourselves supper. It turned out that we had quite a feast. Miss Shuyan fried some fish, and we put our bottles of beer and our vodka, and we sat down at the table, and all at once, moo! It was the cow. We got up and headed for the barn. It was milking time, and there was no milkmaid around. We stood there, 8 men, in front of a cow, and had no idea what to do. In any case, who can explain what sometimes happens to people at the sight of an animal? You live your life day after day without the slightest thought for non-human creatures. And then all at once you find yourself in a situation where one of them's in your home, a cat, a dog, or some other animal, and you find you have the same kind of feelings come over you that you'd have in the presence of a child. Well, you become nervous and you worry. Why is that? Maybe it's really true that the first man, Adam, when God gave him the job of naming all the creatures, looked upon each one with love, and this love is something we've all inherited. It hides for the most part deep down inside us, and makes an appearance only from time to time. Nobody can say for certain whether that's true or not. Only each one of us, I'm telling you, had some sort of feeling for that cow, and I'm positive it felt something for us, too. And this is what came out of it. Zerozhov Kadokov said, "The milk's likely bursting her udder. We've got to do something." We started in pestering Miss Shuyan. Why on earth, we said, did you buy a cow? And yet at the same time we felt bad about selling it. It had only been 1 day, but we had somehow taken to it like one of our own. The cow looked at us with her sorrowful eyes, silently, and then she stretched her head out toward me and let out a loud moo. She was mooing so pleadingly, and I told Miss Shuyan, better get to the milking right away, since you were the one who bought her. And Miss Shuyan quickly fetched the milk pail, tied the kerchief around his head, the kerchief the milkmaid had left behind, and climbed into the cow's stall. He asked us not to leave, as God knows what this cow might do. She let him approach and start milking her. We brought the cow some water to drink, put fresh hay into her stall, and gave her some bread. Miss Shuyan went on milking. At first he wasn't very successful. Only very thin streams of milk came out, and even they sometimes missed the pail, but then it got a little better. After 15 minutes, the milk was still coming, and Miss Shuyan said, whispering for some reason, "Sweat. My sweat's getting in the way." We gathered up handkerchiefs from whoever had them, and Zeroskov Kadokov climbed into the stall to wipe the perspiration from Alexei's forehead. He squatted down beside him to see how the milking was going, from time to time wiping the sweat from Alexei's face. And suddenly we could hear Soyovka's agitated whisper, "What are you doing? You're hurting her. You've got a good stream coming from your right hand, but only a third of that from your left. You can permanently damage her udder that way." "It's my fingers," Miss Shuyan whispered. "It's 'cause my fingers have gone numb on my left hand. Maybe you'd better help." So Yoshov Kadokov approached the cow from the other side, and they began milking together simultaneously. After half an hour, maybe more, they had milked a whole pailful. That night at supper we drank fresh milk, and I swear it was the best tasting milk we'd ever had in our lives. Early the next morning we were awakened by the milkmaid, who told us with some astonishment that she had tried milking the cow that morning, but for some unknown reason the cow wouldn't let her anywhere close to her. Once again, we trotted off to the barn. We did everything just the way we had the night before, and the cow started milking. "Well, ain't that the limit?" exclaimed the woman. "Since the cow seems to like you so much, you can milk her from now on. Happens that way, you know. A cow can let some people come close, but others jolly well won't." Our cow, it turned out, was quite picky. Not only did she not let any of the hired milkmaids near her whenever she was milked, she demanded that one of us stand by her muzzle and feed her and talk to her, while the milking had to be a joint effort on the part of two men together. That meant 3 of us had to go for each milking session. So that's how we drew up the schedule, 3 at a time. At least until we sold the cow, we thought. But it wasn't long before the rumors about our picky cow began flying around. Buyers would come and try milking her themselves, and nothing happened, and they'd refuse to take her even for a pittance. Granted, I did make one condition, that she wasn't to be slaughtered for meat. We called in a veterinarian, and he told us, "Well, this does happen, fellows. An animal gets used to someone and may reject others for a long time. But tell me, what on earth possessed you to domesticate her that way?" He didn't have any real advice to offer us, apart from telling us that our cow was calving, meaning she was pregnant. When the time came, we would have to prepare for the birthing, and the vet indicated the approximate date. We would know when the time was near when she stopped giving milk. Since the men were obliged to keep watch 3 at once, we ended up spending a lot of time at our hacienda, even staying overnight. Our wives had a hard time accepting that we were really having problems with a cow, since they had sworn never to set foot in our hacienda themselves, and looked upon this whole story of the cow as a convenient excuse. The women and wives working at the cooperative completely lost all sense of self-control. They started telling obscene jokes. The one who complained about her husband's bad smell said, "Only a sexual pervert would attract such a perverted cow." To which he retorted, "I'd rather spend my whole life milking a silent cow than listening to your dumb remarks." Soon afterward, he moved out completely to live in the hacienda, later got a divorce from his wife. He married a young country girl with a child and became quite a decent farmer. Then the day came when the cow stopped giving milk. On the vet's advice, we got everything ready for the birthing, but the cow gave birth all by herself without incident. She bore a little bull calf, a handsome son of a gun, and when we called the vet, he took one look at the pair and said, "Well, that's great. Nothing more to be done here. She's taking care of it all by herself. Just keep the place clean and make sure she's fed well." Sometime later, we managed to find a good home for both the cow and her bull calf. One day, we went over to see what a handsome creature he'd turned out into our little bull, and everything was arranged nicely for his mother. Even now, I still think of her. I wonder whether she remembers us. But while we got things settled for the cow, we didn't manage to restore a sense of harmony and mutual understanding in our cooperative. So I ended up dividing the cooperative in 2, reorganizing part of it under a different name. I began using the chartered ship to make long trading voyages to the north along the River Obe. In between such voyages, I conducted business cruises for Russian and foreign entrepreneurs. I took the lesson home that one indispensable condition of success, among others, is a sense of mutual understanding and respect in a collective. You must have faith not only in your own abilities, but in everyone's. Any kind of ability you have is multiplied by your faith in the people around you. Chapter 15. Herbalife Entrepreneurs. It was only upon arriving at Moscow's Vnukovo airport that I realized my funds were rather low. I had only 5 million rubles, which is pretty much $1,000, left, and I did not even have a specific plan of action. It was hardly likely that either my employees or my family would be able to cope with my accumulated debts. They would have to sell the company's assets, meaning I could not look to home for any assistance. Had I remembered in Novembrisk, of course, I could have worked things out, but that would have meant concentrating all of my attention on the daily affairs of my business, something that was impossible after what had happened in the Taiga and the promises I had made both to Anastasia and to myself. Indeed, by this time it was hard to determine whether my actions were being guided by my own awareness and desire or by Anastasia's influence. One thing was crystal clear. I was now bankrupt. Having witnessed countless similar situations among my colleagues, I knew there was nobody that I could turn to, either friends, relatives, or former employees. They would all avoid you like the plague. You can spend 10 years of your life being a hero, and then just one little mistake can put you in the doghouse and make you a non-person, despised by everyone you know. It's happened to a lot of prominent entrepreneurs. In a situation like this, you can only hope in yourself and your own ability to find a way out of a dead-end predicament. After leaving my bag containing a sweater, some shirts, and a few other trifles at a hotel, I started tramping around the streets of Moscow. I tried figuring out what it all meant. Everything Anastasia had said about Russia's entrepreneurs. The first thing that struck my eye in Moscow this time was the activity of the so-called Herbalifers. Neatly dressed people stood in the tunnel leading to metro station in the city center, haranguing passerbys with job offers, with a foreign firm, as they said. They were luring them with promises of huge earnings and opportunity for promotion. The word Herbalife wasn't even mentioned, probably because almost classified advertisement in the papers posted by a job seeker ended with words, "No Herbalife offers." Still, they stood there wearing "Work for You" buttons and handing out flyers from some foreign firm, stubbornly urging people to at least come for an interview. Later, I learned that those responding were subjected to psychological conditioning, with special emphasis on 2 points dear to the heart of the average Russian. First, seminar speakers would make a big thing of telling how they or their relatives, for example, received a fantastic healing with the help of this Herbalife from overseas, with the implication that any potential distributor could also engage in the noble practice of treating people's ailments. The system was so miraculous, they declared, that no medical courses were needed. Just 2 or 3 training sessions, even if you were a simple painter or a plasterer, and presto, you are qualified to act as a consultant to ailing consumers. And secondly, they made a point of telling stories with examples of how one could get rich through promoting and distributing Herbalife products. This meant buying at least one package for starters with your own money, and then finding someone else and convincing him in a one-on-one conversation of the fantastic benefits of using Herbalife, and then selling it to him at a slightly higher price. At the same time, you needed to keep recruiting more distributors, getting a percentage from each new recruit. The more recruits you attracted, the higher you would rise in the hierarchy, and the more money would accrue to you. You would reach a point where you yourself wouldn't even have to do any of the actual distribution work. As an entrepreneur, I soon realized one thing very clearly. Money did come showering down in a rain of gold, but only for the person at the very top of this pyramidal scheme and his closest collaborators. The whole long chain of distributors divided into so-called levels survived only thanks to each level benefiting from its own price markup, and it was all paid for by the one at the very bottom, the consumer who believed in the miracle properties of the product. In some cases, the price increased by 12 times. The actual distribution keeps rolling along nonstop, thanks to the huge number of agents using their own accounts of healing to win the trust of their fellow Russians and make them believe in the miracle properties of Herbalife. A system like this is capable of selling even the ashes from one stove. Any complainers are simply told that they have somehow misunderstood the instructions on the label or maybe not followed them closely enough. This system is especially effective in our country, where people are accustomed to getting the most reliable information from trusted friends and acquaintances rather than through official channels. There is no point whatsoever in discussing the advantages or disadvantages of the Herbalife products themselves. That is a long story. I can say only one thing with absolute certainty. All the fervor of the distributors telling about their own healing disappears as soon as they realize they're not going to get any money from you. In that case, you'll start hearing a whole string of counterexamples such as, "It's nothing but a load of crap." This distribution system was invented in the West. Managed from the West, it lures in all sorts of unemployed Russians. But these are not our entrepreneurs, and now I shall tell you of yet another gimmick invented by Western businessmen. Free holidays in Hawaii. If you should be stopped on a crowded Moscow street by smartly dressed young people, some of whom speak with an accent, inviting you to a presentation by a foreign firm with your own reserved table and free lottery tickets, offering you the opportunity to win a gold watch, even a free trip to Hawaii, you can be sure that you will be guaranteed a free trip. But it is best to bear in mind the old saying, "The only free cheese is in a mousetrap." It's not hard to figure out just how this particular mousetrap works. What you get for free is the opportunity to stay in elegant lodgings. Upon arriving, you discover that they really do look like the photos in the brochures. The catch is you have to pay for the airline ticket, your food, and all the incidentals. A few days into your stay, you realize that this free vacation is ending up costing you quite a bit more than the full price of a stay at some other comparable resort. It's all very simple. Your free stay is paid for by a host of surcharges on a range of food and other services. These surcharges cover, by the way, the agents standing on the street corners and the so-called free presentation, the color brochures they hand you, not to mention the company's profit. Of course, for those with lots of money to spare, it doesn't make too much difference. The only bad thing you might feel is the unpleasant sensation of being made a fool of. It is quite a different matter when an average Russian wage earner of modest means, one who has spent a whole year saving for such a trip, takes the bait, and instead of going to see his mother or for a holiday at a Russian resort, hands over his hard-earned savings to these foreign smartasses and, like a fool, spends 2 weeks in lodgings designed for fools like him. Gentlemen from abroad, where did this attitude of disrespect for us Russians come from? As I was looking at the sales kiosks on our streets, filled with imported goods, even imported bottled water, I remembered how it had been the same on my ships. but back then I had never really thought about what was behind it. I was listening to radio reports about the suspicious quality of the chicken legs on sale all over the country, as well as about bottled water with fancy labels promoting its healing mineral properties, belying the fact that this sold in our stores was simply tap water with suspicious additives. The huge number of signs advertising how you could refresh your strength with a hot dog, as if all of Moscow and even all of Russia had suddenly made these rubber sausages their national dish, and wondering why this had never struck me before as it did now. I remembered the respect and enthusiasm with which we'd greeted visiting entrepreneurs from abroad at the beginning of Perestroika. I remembered how I'd organized business cruises down the River Ob for them on my ship, and how the Siberian entrepreneurs tried as hard as they could to provide them with the highest quality service. Of course, not all the visitors were the same, but what did we gain in the long term? So where are you, entrepreneurs of Russia, the ones that should be making our country flourish? The beginning of Perestroika. At the very beginning of Perestroika, when the first law on cooperatives in the USSR was enacted, many saw it as a call to action. A lot of young people, as well as many not so young, but invariably full of energy and desire to really do something for themselves and their country, literally threw themselves into the fray, and immediately found themselves surrounded by a hostile, pestering crowd. "Down with them," the crowd shouted. "Bourgeois smartasses! What did we fight for, anyway?" And even though many of Russia's pioneer entrepreneurs ended up working around the clock, pouring in a colossal amount of energy, not to mention their unique wit and inventiveness, hardly any of their efforts met with so much as a thank you. The modicum of support they required was usually provided only by intercommunication and interaction with each other. Then a concept was born. It literally came out of thin air. The idea of creating a union of USSR cooperators. I was part of the pilot group initiating this project, along with the well-known Russian entrepreneur Artem Terezov. Most of us at the time were communists. At the first Entrepreneurs Congress, I was elected secretary of the Congress's party committee. I tried to explain to our overseer from the Communist Party Central Committee, Comrade Koloskovsky, that it was incredibly difficult for entrepreneurs to work under such pestering. We needed first and foremost the party's moral support. But I soon realized that we were going to be facing hostility and pestering from a segment of the ordinary public, as well as high and low-ranking officials, for a long time to come. We could not look to the higher echelons of the Central Committee for any outward show of support, since they were afraid of losing popularity. Already their power was greatly diminished compared to the heyday of Soviet communism. An integral struggle had apparently begun and was now in full swing. In addition, entrepreneurs had begun to feel mounting pressure from a tax squeeze, and today, with maybe one or two exceptions, not a single business can keep afloat if it dutifully pays all of the required taxes. Now, realizing this, many of them have managed to escape the tax squeeze by using all sorts of tricky loopholes. But in doing this, they have landed themselves in an even more precarious situation. Being outside the law, Attempt after attempt to make officials on various levels see the absurdity of the prevailing tax system have not exactly been crowned with success. Indeed, they could not be, since the ones who initiated the system, and this is my own personal assumption, understand better than anyone else the impossibility of paying all of these taxes. But this was exactly what they needed. But needed for what? Well, for power, of course, for extortion. One false step, and you can be instantly ground to powder, outlawed by tax police and inspectors. I felt sorry for the first entrepreneurs of perestroika, as well as for Russia's current crop of businessmen. I decided to do for them whatever lay within my powers. I went to the League of Russian Cooperations and Entrepreneurs, originally headed by Vladimir Alexandrovich Tikhonov, whom we had elected to the post in perestroika's early days. The League's executive presidium still maintained a headquarters, but many of the offices were empty. And Alexandrovich had died a year and a half earlier. I was told that the chairman of the Russian Business Roundtable, Ivan Kvitely, had been poisoned, together with the secretary just 6 months ago. Artem Terezov had resigned from the League, and the organization's membership was only a shadow of its former self. Thanks to my acquaintance with one of these remaining League executives, that my request for space in one of the empty offices was granted, along with 2 telephones, a computer, and a fax machine. Since the League had no organizational funds available, I was pretty much on my own. And to save time and hotel expenses, I used the office for my sleeping quarters. I was awakened every morning at 6 o'clock by the arrival of the cleaning lady, and the absence of a TV allowed me to work most evenings right up to midnight. This sudden shift in living conditions from a luxury ship's cabin, where anything I wanted to eat or drink was only a bell ring away, to a drab office, not designed for living accommodation, in no way embarrassed me. In many respects, it actually afforded my greater opportunities to pursue my work. I spent my time thinking out and drafting a constitution for a fellowship of entrepreneurs, along with compiling letters of appeal. These I sent out by fax in the early hours of the morning, when the communication lines weren't as busy, and by hook or by crook, making use of both newspaper adverts and chance encounters, I gathered together a secretariat of various Moscow professionals who shared my enthusiasm for the project and realized its significance. The secretariat also included 3 Moscow University students, and first there came Anton Nikolaikin, who had been called in to fix a broken computer, and later, after learning of our work on organizing the fellowship, he brought along 2 of his friends. They immediately began work on encoding the electronic version of the Golden Catalog of Russia, for which they were able to put together a highly professional computer program. And this is the Fellowship of Russian Entrepreneurs. The idea of a fellowship meant that it would be open to any entrepreneur who had been active in the Russian market for at least a year and were sincerely striving to develop honest relationships, not only with each other, but with their clients and their employees. Representatives of various non-profit societies tried to persuade me that today's entrepreneurs were cool to the idea of any form of organization, that the age of faith-based euphoria had passed, and that membership in societies one could join simply by paying a modest fee had diminished catastrophically. They argued, furthermore, that the idea of organizing a fellowship with additional requirements involving the ethical standards of both the entrepreneur and the enterprise, was simply absurd. My old friend Artem Tarasov, having heard about my arrival in Moscow and what I was up to, came to one of the round tables. He set to work on drafting documents, including an appeal to entrepreneurs. He laid out several thousands of dollars so I could make up glossy brochures to give out to delegates at a small business congress being organized in Moscow. But the congress organizers decided not to allow any brochures on the fellowship to be handed out, no doubt fearing competition. As a result, secretarial staff and students positioned themselves outside the entrances to the Rosia Hotel, trying to hand delegates folders containing these brochures. They stood there, they stood there withstanding both the cold and attempts to chase them away by the militia, who thought some kind of illegal selling might be taking place. And Artem Tarasov still managed to take a package of brochures into the Kremlin Palace of Congresses, where the Congress was being held, though unfortunately only a rather small quantity. The operation we had placed so many of our hopes on ended in failure. Organizing the fellowship was proving to be an impossibility. The difficulty was that getting the necessary information out to all the entrepreneurs across our country required a huge outlay of rubles on printing and postage costs, since favorable responses were coming in from only 10% of the people that we managed to reach. The required funds were simply not available. Besides, the League executive kept back a portion of the membership fees as office space rent, as they had no other source of funds. Sensing some sort of snag, the League stopped giving out money for organizational expenses altogether, in spite of the fact that the membership fees had been specifically earmarked for organizational expenses. The League needed to use the entrepreneur's membership fee just to cover operating costs, and then they began holding back wage payments for the secretarial staff. I was obliged to vacate the League's premises, leaving behind my second computer, which had been purchased with funds from the entrepreneurs who had joined the fellowship. "How come?" queried the students in bewilderment. Students who had spent hours working out computer programs at their own expense. "We've been doing the work which this non-profit organization, according to its own constitution, is supposed to carry out, and here they're treating us like tenants and spitting on the entrepreneurs in the process," the League executive argued. "The office rent must be paid." With what was left of the secretarial staff, I tried to carry on the work out of one of the entrepreneurial trade union offices, but the same situation repeated itself, and after getting to know the leaders of several non-profit organizations, I suddenly realized that they all had titles, but no membership, something like the so-called sofa parties, existing only for the benefit of their executives. While this was not true of the Farmers and Peasants Association, headed by Vladimir Bashmarnivkov, and there may be other exceptions, this was the general state of affairs at the time. And even today, there is no non-profit organization in Russia bringing together any significant number of entrepreneurs, and those that do exist are of the sofa party variety. Why? Among the possible causes, I would include the anonymity of membership fees. For some reason, it always happens that once an executive body is created, it starts making decisions on behalf of entrepreneurs without consulting the majority. Walking away from the trade union office, I now found myself without any means of communication and without and everything to live on. Excuse me. Artem Tarasov had by this time immigrated to London. He had tried to get himself on the ballot for the Russian presidency and had spent billions of rubles collecting the required signatures. But when the Central Election Committee invalidated most of those signatures, Artem was obliged to look after repairing his own financial affairs. The local residents working in the secretariat, not receiving any pay, were obliged to quit. I was left alone. Or rather, I thought I had been left alone. But 3 Moscow students weren't about to abandon the work that they had started. This was Anton, Artem, and Lyosha. Anton actually used his own holiday savings to pay the monthly rent on an apartment for me. They were willing to wait until I sought and found a way out of my present circumstances and could continue my work on creating the fellowship. They had got caught up by the whole idea. They believed in it. But I could see nothing ahead but a dead end. It was right at this time that some news arrived from Novosibirsk. And this is Chapter 19, Suicide? One evening a man from Novosibirsk dropped by to see me. He was in Moscow on some business of his own. He brought along a bottle of vodka and some light snacks. We sat in the kitchen of my one-room flat, and he told me about how things stood with my family and my company. The situation was indeed deplorable. My firm had had to give up one of its offices in the center of the city for lack of funds to pay the rent. Our automobile spare parts store had had to close. The workers there tried selling shoes, but their debts only increased. The entire responsibility fell on my shoulders. And here you're up to goodness knows what. A lot of people are saying that you've gone mad. You should have worked out things at the company first, and then gone off and done your own thing, whatever that is. Nobody there has faith in you any more, Vladimir. As we were finishing off the bottle, he asked me, "You want me to tell you my honest opinion, what they expect of you?" "Well, go ahead," I replied. "They would like you to do away with yourself, or at least disappear for good. You be the judge. It's impossible to start anything now without any seed capital, and here not only do you not have any seed capital, you don't even have enough to live on. So, you know, nobody's ever heard of someone climbing out of a hole like this. But with you out of the picture, your death will settle everything, and they can divide up what's left of your estate. Your wife says that according to the horoscope, you're a Leo, and you've been wasting your whole life away, so you should die in poverty, just like in the horoscope. Come on now, why did you undertake that second expedition? Nobody can figure that out." In spite of the fact that we were both pretty drunk, when I awoke the next morning, I had a clear recollection of the whole conversation. His arguments were forceful and convincing. Novosibirsk was a dead end. There was a dead-end situation here in Moscow, too. People who had worked alongside me were suffering. My family was suffering. I couldn't possibly find a way out and fix everything. There was simply no way out. And yes, only my death could put an end to this suffering. Of course, suicide is never the right thing to do, but according to the logic of events, my suicide would relieve the suffering of others. And if that was the case, then he was right, and I had no right to live. So I decided to do away with myself. The thought of it even brought comfort to me. I was freed from the need to undertake a torturous search for a way out of my present situation, since I agreed that death was the only way out. So I cleaned up the apartment a bit, and I wrote the landlady a note to say that I wouldn't be back. I decided to go to the trades union office to put the fellowship files in order. Someone, okay, maybe not now, but later perhaps, would carry on with this work. The only question was, how would I do away with myself when I didn't even have enough money to buy the poison? Then I really began thinking, maybe it shouldn't look like suicide. Maybe I'd take a dip in the river just like the walruses and then jump through a hole in the ice and drown. So I headed off toward the Moskov River. As I was making my way through an underground passageway at the Pushkinovska metro station, my ear all at once caught a familiar melody. It was being played by two young girls on their violins. An open violin case lay on the pavement in front of them, and passers-by were tossing in money. A lot of buskers make extra money like that at metro stations. But the way these two girls were playing their sweet melody amidst the bustle of noisy pedestrians and the screeching of trains in the background caused many a passer-by to slow down and to listen. As for me, I couldn't help but stop dead in my tracks. The violin bows were echoing a melody I had heard only once before in the Siberian taiga, a melody sung by Anastasia. Back there in the taiga, I had once asked her to sing something of her own, a song I'd never heard before, and she came out with this extraordinary, unusual, captivating melody without words. She started by screaming like a newborn baby, and then her voice began sounding ever so quiet and tender. She stood beneath a tree, her hands clasped to her breast, and it seemed as though her voice was a lullaby, gently caressing a little baby, trying to tell him something. Her voice was so quiet it caused everything around to be still and to listen. And then she seemed to be filled with delight at the little one waking from sleep, and her voice took off with rejoicing. The incredibly high-pitched sounds and the cascading trills soared and took flight to the heavens, radiating through space and delighting all around. I asked the girls, "What were you playing?" They exchanged glances, and one of them said, "I was just sort of improvising," and the other chimed in, "and I was just playing along." Here in Moscow, caught up as I was with the idea of setting up the Fellowship of Entrepreneurs, which had become the main focus of my life, I had almost completely forgotten about Anastasia. And now, on the last day of my life, as though to say farewell, here she was reminding me of her existence. "Please, play some more the way you were playing before," I asked the girls. "We'll try," the older one replied. And there I stood in the metro station passageway listening to the captivating melody of the violins and remembering the glade in the taiga and thinking, "Anastasia, it's much too complicated to make all that you thought up coming true in real life. It's one thing to dream, quite another to turn that dream into reality. Some sort of mistake must have crept in as you were working out your plan. Organize a fellowship of entrepreneurs and write a book." I felt as though a flood had hit me. Repeating these last two phrases over and over again, I felt there was something out of place. Something wasn't right. Back there in the taiga, the words had been spoken not quite the same way. But how? How else would they have been said? I continued repeating them. I happened to switch the word order, and I heard myself saying, "Write a book, organize a fellowship of entrepreneurs." But of course, the book should have been written first. The book was supposed to settle all these questions and, most importantly, spread information about the fellowship. Yikes, how much time I realized that I'd wasted. And in the meantime, look at how complicated my personal life had become. All right, then, I'll get busy, I thought. At least now it's clear just what I should be busy at. It's absurd, of course. Someone who doesn't know how to write, writing a book, especially one he expects people to actually read. But Anastasia had faith that it would work out. She kept trying to convince me. Okay, that means I've really, really got to try now. And I've got to see it through to the end. And with that, I'm at chapter 20, and I think I cannot go on anyway. I was saying that I might just take an hour for this read today. And chapter 20 is actually the ringing cedars of Russia. So it's about, I guess he finally got the message from Anastasia as he was about to try to figure out how to take his life, because nothing was working. And he was told pretty much from people from his company and his back home that all of his people, even his wife, was suffering by what he was doing or perhaps not doing. Okay, so I'm going to close here with just this part of the read on the second book. Next week will be chapter 20, The Ringing Cedars of Russia, and we'll see what that actually means for him. I guess he's going to attempt to write this book. We'll see what that all means and what Anastasia was really trying to guide him with, and how these two young girls in the subway, or metro as they call it, were playing the melody that she had sung in the forests of the Taiga. Okay, so thanks for tuning in today and sticking with me here. It's pouring rain out right now, but it is hot. It's muggy. So I hope everyone enjoyed this read and will come next week to hear me. And meanwhile, have a good week, and I will see you next week. Pilamaya, Doksha.